Jake Thompson was an energetic 10-year-old boy living on his family's isolated Nebraska farm, with the summer sun beat down relentlessly and the vast cornfields shimmered like a golden ocean. One afternoon, while playing soccer, Jake accidentally kicked his ball into his dad's barn, a place he was strictly forbidden to enter. As he played, his youthful determination was evident. He counted each kick in a steady rhythm, the sound of the ball striking the weathered siding of their two-story farmhouse, forming the soundtrack to his summer afternoons. His mother, Linda Thompson, called out cheerfully from the kitchen window, "Jake, I'm making some fresh lemonade. You should take a break soon before you get heat stroke." But Jake persisted, his eyes focused on the ball as he repeated his kick count in a quiet murmur of 13 under his breath. Determined to reach a self-imposed goal of 50 consecutive kicks, he pushed his limits despite the scorching heat. Approaching his 48th kick, he drew his leg back with extra force in the hope of finishing his challenge with a powerful strike. In that fateful moment, when his foot met the ball, Jake knew he had miscalculated. The ball soared high into the air, far beyond his intended target, arcing toward the old red barn that stood imposingly at the edge of the property. Time seemed to slow as Jake watched, heart pounding and throat tightening, while the ball crashed through one of the dusty windows of the barn. The sound of shattering glass cut through the quiet afternoon air like a sudden gunshot, and shimmering shards danced briefly in the sunlight before falling to the ground. For an instant, Jake froze, his heart racing as he stared at the forbidden barn, a place his father, Robert Thompson, had made abundantly clear was off-limits, especially after the farm had lost its main cattle contract the previous year. The barn had been strictly off-limits for months, with Robert insisting it was used for storing dangerous equipment and materials. In the midst of his panic and the realization of the broken window, Jake muttered "stupid, stupid, stupid" to himself, knowing his father would be furious. Yet, leaving the ball behind was not an option either. It was the only decent piece of sports equipment he owned, a cherished birthday gift from his uncle before he moved away. With a quick glance over the driveway to make sure his father's mud-splattered pickup truck was still missing, Robert had mentioned checking the irrigation system in the north field that morning. Jake realized he had a precious, albeit brief, window of opportunity. With cautious steps and increasing dread in every footfall, he approached the barn. The massive structure loomed ahead. Its red paint was peeling to reveal weathered wood beneath. And as he drew near, he noticed something odd. A large padlock on the door, oddly left unlocked and hanging open on the latch, as if his father had forgotten to secure it during his morning check. Every instinct warned him to turn back and confess to Linda about the broken window and await punishment, yet an overpowering curiosity urged him forward. Taking a deep breath, Jake pressed against the heavy wooden door, which creaked loudly and broke the silence of that sweltering summer afternoon. The door swung open to reveal the shadowy interior of the barn, where sunlight streamed through cracks in the walls and the shattered window, illuminating swirling dust particles in beams of light. The air inside carried the familiar scent of hay and old wood, mixed with a mustiness that hinted at long-hidden secrets, and the cooler interior offered a welcome relief from the oppressive heat outside. Inside, farm equipment lay covered in tarps along one wall, while neat stacks of hay bales lined another. Jake's eyes immediately caught sight of his soccer ball, resting near a central pile of hay. A wave of relief flooded over him at the thought of simply grabbing the ball and leaving quickly so that his father would never discover he had been inside the forbidden barn. However, as he moved further into the dim interior, ready to reclaim his treasured ball, he encountered something completely unexpected. A small makeshift bed constructed of hay bales, complete with a thin mattress or some rudimentary bedding, partially hidden behind neatly stacked feed bags. More shocking than the bed was the realization that someone was lying on it. A young girl, about 6 years old, dressed in a pink dress that might once have been bright but was now faded and stained, slept peacefully. Her tangled, dirty blonde hair and the worn, too small clothes that clung to her frail frame immediately stirred within Jake a sense of deep concern. Near her feet, his soccer ball lay on the straw-covered floor, and a plastic bucket, a half-empty water bottle, and the remains of a sandwich completed the unsettling tableau. Curiosity and fear intermingled as Jake stepped closer, and the creak of the floorboard under his foot startled the sleeping girl. At that moment, she stirred and her wide, terrified eyes flew open as if she had been jolted from a nightmare. For a heartbeat, time stood still as they locked eyes, neither moving or speaking, while Jake struggled to make sense of this surreal encounter. In a timid whisper, he introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Jake. I live in the house. Who are you?" The little girl did not respond. Instead, she pulled her knees tightly to her chest and pressed herself against the wall behind a makeshift bed. Her eyes darted toward the barn door and then back at Jake, as though calculating whether it was safe to trust him. Gently, with an assuring tone meant to dispel the fear in her eyes, Jake said, "I'm not going to hurt you. Why are you in our barn? Are you lost?" Before she could answer, the distant rumble of his father's tractor broke the fragile silence, a sound that signaled Robert's unexpected early return from the fields. Panic surged through Jake as his heart hammered against his ribs. The little girl's eyes widened in terror as she shrank back against the wall, pulling a thin blanket over herself as if she could hide from the impending danger. Without thinking further, Jake abandoned his soccer ball and dashed toward the barn door. In his desperate haste, he closed it behind him, though in his rush he forgot to secure the padlock again. He sprinted several yards away, then forced himself to slow his pace to a steady walk as he attempted to appear normal despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. Moments later, his father's truck came into view over the rise in the driveway, dust billowing behind it as it approached the farmyard. Although tempted to run for the house, Jake knew that drawing additional attention would only worsen the situation. Instead, he kept his cool for a moment longer while he controlled his trembling hands and rapid breathing. Robert Thompson soon spotted Jake near the barn as he parked his truck, his sunburned, weathered face contorting with rage. Jumping from the tractor, his imposing figure stormed toward his son while his eyes darted between Jake and the broken window, a stark reminder of Jake's transgression. In a low, dangerous voice, Robert demanded, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" With broad shoulders and calloused hands bearing the marks of long days spent working outdoors, he loomed over Jake as he scolded him with fierce intensity. Jake, swallowing his fear and pain, managed to stammer, "I'm sorry, Dad. My ball went through the window accidentally, but I didn't go inside to get it. I was just checking the damage." Robert's eyes narrowed with suspicion as he glanced at the barn door and noted the missing padlock. "I'll get your ball later," he declared after a long, tense pause, "and you're going to work off the cost of that window with extra chores." Leaning in close, his voice grew low and menacing as he continued, "Let me make myself perfectly clear. You are never to go near this barn again. It's dangerous in there with all the equipment and chemicals. Do you understand me?" Reluctantly, Jake replied, "Yes, sir," fighting the urge to step back, though every fiber of his being trembled beneath his father's stern gaze. Shaken by his father's harsh words and the weight of what he had seen, Jake hurried away, his small frame moving quickly toward the house. Questions swirled in his mind about the terrified girl hidden inside the barn, but he knew better than to mention her aloud. Instead, he retreated to his bedroom and sat on the edge of his bed, his eyes fixed out the window on the barn. The image of the frightened girl was impossible to shake from his thoughts, and time passed in a haze of worry and confusion until his mother's voice called from the porch, summoning him and his father inside for dinner. Despite his sadness, Jake managed to hurry indoors, offering his mother a quick smile that did not reach his eyes. In the bathroom, he scrubbed his hands vigorously, as if trying to wash away the haunting memory of what he had witnessed, while the girl's terrified face replayed over and over behind his closed eyelids. At dinner, Robert shoveled food into his mouth with barely any pause between bites. The clinking of forks against plates intermingled with his occasional grumbles about prices at the feed store, which had increased by 30% since last summer. "Highway robbery is what it is," he muttered, stabbing a piece of chicken. "How's a family farm supposed to survive when the big corporations keep squeezing us dry?" Linda nodded sympathetically while pushing her food around on her plate with eyes downcast, her prematurely graying hair pulled back into a practical ponytail, and her once pretty features now etched with worry. Amid this tense family dinner, Jake's mind remained fixed on the mysterious girl. Seizing a quiet moment, he leaned toward his mother and whispered, "Mom, do I have a sister?" His question had an immediate and dramatic effect. Linda dropped the plate she had been clearing from her hands, which shattered on the floor as fragments scattered across the linoleum. Robert's expression soured instantly as he demanded, "What the hell happened?" while clutching a cold beer. Linda's face had gone pale, and she hurriedly insisted, "Just an accident. My hands were wet and slipped right out." Robert's eyes shifted suspiciously between Linda and Jake, and when he asked, "What were you two talking about?" Linda's voice came out unnaturally high as she deflected. "Nothing important. Jake, tell your father about school yesterday. Didn't you have some special presentation?" Caught off guard by his mother's attempt to change the subject, Jake hesitated before murmuring, Yeah. Officer Reynolds came to talk to our class about safety." At the mention of the police, Robert's expression darkened further. Slamming his hand on the table so hard that both Linda and Jake jumped, he roared, "I'm trying to watch the game. Can we have some damn quiet in this house for once?" Linda visibly flinched at the sudden movement, and the palpable tension in the room grew as they finished the meal in uneasy silence, the only sound the blaring television in the living room. After dinner, Robert sank deeper into his recliner with more beers, raising the volume of the TV as the night progressed. Linda sent Jake off to do his homework and take a shower with quiet, yet urgent, instructions not to mention the barn. In his bedroom, as Jake sat at his small desk with his math textbook open before him, the numbers blurred on the page as his mind wandered back to the mysterious girl and his mother's strange reaction. There was something very wrong in their home, something extending far beyond the financial troubles his father often complained about. When Linda came in to say goodnight later that evening, her smile seemed forced and her eyes darted nervously down the hall as if she were afraid Robert might appear at any moment. Leaning close, Jake whispered, "Mom, about what I asked earlier," but she interrupted gently, "Not now, Jake. Please just not now. Get some sleep. Everything will be fine." As she closed his bedroom door, Jake knew deep in his heart that nothing was fine. The memory of the girl in the barn, his mother's reaction, and his father's anger all pointed toward a secret that had been hidden from him for perhaps years. Lying in bed, he stared at the ceiling as soft moonlight filtered through his curtains. The digital clock glowed 11:15 p.m., yet despite his exhaustion, sleep remained elusive. His mind returned relentlessly to the image of the small, frightened girl with her dirty blonde hair and terrified eyes. The sound of raised voices downstairs soon interrupted his thoughts. His father's deep voice rumbled through the floorboards while his mother's responses were too soft to decipher. Jake strained to hear, catching only fragments of angry tones and sharp words. A sudden thud made him flinch, followed by what sounded like his mother crying. Then silence settled over the house. Clutching his blanket tightly around him, his heart pounding as he held his breath, Jake realized that he had heard such sounds before, but tonight they seemed more ominous, more connected to the secret that lived in that forbidden barn. Just as his heavy eyelids began to close, he heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs, accompanied by the closing of his parents' bedroom door. Exhaling slowly in relief that the argument might finally be over, Jake drifted towards sleep. Yet, as he did, new sounds stirred him once more. The creak of the back door opening and the faint jingle of keys. Overwhelmed by curiosity and a desperate need for answers, he slipped out of bed and moved quietly to the window overlooking the backyard, a window that offered a clear view of the barn. Bathed in the full moon's silvery glow that transformed the familiar landscape into something almost otherworldly, Jake watched as his father, evidently inebriated, stumbled toward the barn. Robert carried what looked like a plate of food in one hand and a bottle in the other. The barn door opened and closed repeatedly, swallowing his father's silhouette. For a long, agonizing moment, Jake counted silently until he reached 60, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure it would wake his mother in the next room. Finally, gathering every ounce of courage, he decided it was time for action. Slipping on his sneakers without bothering to tie the laces, he tiptoed downstairs, careful to avoid that notorious creaky step at the bottom. The cool night air brushed against his skin as he sneaked across the yard, staying within the forgiving shadows cast by the moonlight. Crickets chirped in the tall grass, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, a sound that usually brought him comfort, but tonight only heightened his sense of dread. Approaching the barn cautiously, every beat of his heart echoed the frantic memories of the girl's frightened eyes. From within the barn, he could hear muffled voices, his father's slurred, angry tone intermingled with crying. The memory of the little girl, who seemed to plead silently for help, flashed in his mind. "You should be grateful," he recalled hearing his father slur. "Nobody else would take care of you like this. Nobody even looks for you anymore." A soft sob followed those words, twisting something painfully in Jake's chest. He longed to burst inside to confront his father and help the girl, but fear rooted him to the spot. His father, a large man with a violent temper, especially when drinking, was not someone to be defied lightly. Instead, Jake retreated from the barn door, his mind racing with thoughts of Officer Reynolds' lesson from school. If you see someone who needs help, tell a trusted adult. If no adult will listen, call 911. You might be the only person who can save someone in danger. In that moment, with everything trembling inside him, Jake made a decision that would change everything. Silently, he returned to the house, moving past his mother's closed bedroom door. In the dimly lit kitchen, the cordless phone in its cradle glowed softly in the darkness. With trembling hands and a racing heart, he dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, Jake whispered as quietly as he could, "There's a girl in our barn. I think she's hurt. My dad keeps her locked up." He provided their address, 4587, County Road 19, outside of Millfield, then hung up quickly, terrified that his father might return at any moment. Heart pounding with both fear and resolve, he replaced the phone and rushed back to his room, taking the stairs two at a time despite the risk of making noise. Finally, he dove into bed and pulled the covers up to his chin, his adrenaline still coursing through his veins. From his window, he could see the barn waiting, almost as if it were alive, and silently he prayed that help would arrive before his father discovered what he had done. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. Jake wondered if he had done the right thing. What if the police didn't come? What if they didn't believe him? What if his father discovered that it was Jake who had called? Yet beneath all his fear was a certainty. The little girl in the barn needed help, and perhaps he was the only one who could get it for her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the barn door opened again and his father emerged. Robert secured the padlock once more, checking it twice before heading back toward the house, his movements still unsteady. With a heavy heart, Jake quickly closed his eyes and pretended to sleep, regulating his breathing as his father's heavy footsteps echoed past his bedroom door. In the dark of the night, Jake lay motionless, his eyes fixed on the glowing numbers of the digital clock, which now read 12:17 a.m. The minutes crawled by as he lay there wondering if the police would arrive or if they would simply find nothing. He imagined his father's suspicions and the inevitable questions that would follow. Yet, the image of the frightened girl persisted, strengthening his resolve that he could not leave her in that barn. Then suddenly, blue and red lights illuminated his bedroom walls as the sound of crunching tires on the gravel driveway signaled that help had finally arrived. A car door opened and closed, and footsteps approached the house. The sound of insistent knocking at the front door echoed throughout the farmhouse. Jake held his breath as his father's angry voice rang out from upstairs. "Who the hell is coming around at this hour?" His mother's softer tones followed as she tried to calm him. "Frank, please calm down. Let me see who it is." Curiosity mixed with trepidation, Jake crept to his bedroom door and peered into the darkened hallway. He heard his father stomping down the stairs, muttering curses under his breath. Soon, the front door opened fully, and a deep, steady voice introduced itself. "Deputy Carter, Millfield County Sheriff's Department. Sorry to disturb you folks so late. What's this about?" At that moment, his father's tone changed as if forced into politeness. a calm before an inevitable storm. The deputy explained professionally that he had received a call from the residents about a person in distress, with specific mention of the barn. Robert, in disbelief, snapped, "That's ridiculous. My wife and son are both in bed. Nobody made any call." Linda's footsteps joined the conversation as her voice inquired, "Is everything all right, officer?" The deputy repeated that someone had called 911 from the residence reporting a person in need of assistance, with the report specifically mentioning the barn. A tense silence fell over the household as the deputy spoke. In that charged silence, Jake could almost see his father's face reddening with anger and his mother's eyes widening with fear. Finally, Robert declared, "That's absurd. There's nothing in our barn but equipment and feed. Somebody's playing a prank on you, deputy." Yet, as Jake lay in bed listening to his father's lies echoing up the stairs, something inside him shifted. The image of the frightened girl, her dirty blonde hair and terror-stricken eyes, returned with vivid clarity. He realized that if he stayed silent, what would happen to her when the police left and his father returned to the barn? With that sudden clarity, Jake felt his moment of truth arrive. He could hide beneath his covers and pretend nothing was wrong as he had done whenever his father's temper flared, or he could stand up and tell the truth, whatever the consequences might be. Trembling, his hands shaking as he pushed back his blankets, and his legs weak yet determined, he slowly opened his bedroom door fully and made his way to the top of the stairs. At the top, from his vantage point, he saw Deputy Carter standing in the doorway, a tall man in uniform with one hand resting casually near his holster. His father, with his back turned and posture rigid with tension, did not notice as Linda stood slightly to the side, her arms wrapped around herself for protection, her face pale in the harsh porch light. The deputy's eyes flickered between the three family members as he inquired, "Is that your son?" Robert's face, now filled with betrayal and rage, tightened as he spotted Jake. In spite of his father's intimidating stare, Jake mustered the courage to descend the last few steps and confessed in a small but steady voice, "I did. I heard cries coming from inside the barn. There's a girl in there." Robert's face darkened immediately, and he muttered in anger that he had a nightmare, placing a heavy hand on Jake's shoulder in a squeeze that hurt. Kids his age have active imaginations. "I'm sorry he troubled you, deputy. I wasn't dreaming," Jake insisted, shrugging away from his father's grip. The deputy's expression remained neutral, but his posture shifted as he asked directly, "Is that right?" Robert interjected with increasing anger, "There's no one in our barn. This is private property, deputy. Unless you have a warrant, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Deputy Carter studied Robert's face for a long moment, then glanced over at Linda, who stood frozen with her eyes darting between her husband and son. The tension was so thick it could be cut with a knife as the deputy said carefully, "Mr. Thompson, when a minor reports someone in distress, I have a duty to investigate." He then suggested a quick check of the barn, explaining that it would only take a minute to reassure Jake and resolve the matter. Robert immediately refused, adamant that the barn was private property and that a warrant was needed to inspect it. As the deputy observed the dynamics, he noted that Linda flinched whenever Robert raised his voice, and when she brushed her hair from her face, her sleeve revealed purplish bruises circling her wrist. The deputy's gaze lingered on those marks before returning to Robert's increasingly agitated face. In a strained voice, Robert explained, "My son had a nightmare. He sleepwalks sometimes. Isn't that right, Linda?" Linda's eyes dropped to the floor as she softly conceded that Jake had indeed experienced nightmares before, though she did not confirm more than that. The deputy, nodding thoughtfully, stated, "Well, here's the situation as I see it. I have received a report that must be documented, even if there's no immediate evidence. So I must file this as an unresolved welfare check, which may require a follow-up visit from Child Protective Services." At the mention of CPS, Robert's face twisted with anger and something else, fear. "CPS? That's ridiculous. We're good parents," he snapped, but Linda's eyes remained fixed on the floor. "I'm sure you are," Deputy Carter said in a calm tone, "which is why I'm offering a simple solution. A quick check of the barn to close the matter immediately. No further reports, no follow-up necessary. Robert protested weakly, citing that it was the middle of the night and the barn was locked, meaning he'd have to find the key. Deputy Carter replied that he was in no hurry, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Robert's growing agitation. Jake watched the tense exchange with his heart in his throat, silently witnessing his father's calculating attempt to avoid the situation. For a moment, he feared that his father would convince the deputy to leave, leaving the mysterious girl in the barn at risk. Deputy Carter glanced around the entryway, noting fresh mud on Robert's work boots that clearly matched the path to the barn, despite Robert's earlier claims that no one ever went there. "Those your work boots, Mr. Thompson?" the deputy asked casually, nodding toward the muddy footwear. Robert replied too quickly, "Yeah, so what? They're pretty fresh. I just checked the equipment earlier." But Deputy Carter remained unconvinced. "Mr. Thompson, your son made a very specific report about seeing a young girl in your barn. I see fresh mud tracks leading to and from the barn, and I've observed bruises on your wife's wrist that look like finger marks. You seem extraordinarily resistant to a simple welfare check that would take only 5 minutes." Robert's face contorted with rage as he accused the deputy of implying something unsavory. But Deputy Carter calmly explained that he simply could not leave without inspecting the barn. The tension reached a fever pitch as Deputy Carter then stated, "We can do this the easy way, with your full cooperation, or I will call for backup and obtain a warrant. In any case, I will be looking inside that barn tonight." Linda's eyes flitted between her husband and son, and even though she stood frozen with fear and obedience, Jake could see the internal struggle playing out on her face. After what seemed like an eternity of standoff, Robert finally relented in a dangerous calm. "Fine, let's go look in the damn barn. You'll see there's nothing there but my son's imagination." Deputy Carter finished his radio call and gestured toward the door, saying, "After you, Mr. Thompson." Robert grabbed a flashlight from a kitchen drawer and stomped toward the door while Deputy Carter followed closely. As Jake moved to join them, Linda grabbed his arm, whispering desperately, "Stay here. I need to show them where she is." Insisting, Jake replied that he needed to go so the deputy could see exactly where he had seen someone. Reluctantly, Linda released him, and he hurried to catch up with the deputy while keeping close and away from his father. As they crossed the yard toward the barn, the deputy kept one hand near his holster, eyes fixed on Robert's every move. The night was quiet aside from the sound of their footsteps on the gravel path and the distant call of a night board. Upon reaching the barn, Robert fumbled with the padlock, deliberately slow, as if to stall. "See, it's locked up tight. No one can get in or out," he insisted when the deputy demanded, "Open it, please." Robert pretended to struggle with the key, complaining, "Damn, these things always stick." Deputy Carter's patience wore thin as he repeated, "Mr. Thompson, I need you to open that lock now." Finally, as Robert inserted the key, he suddenly changed tactics, declaring, "You know what? I've had enough of this nonsense. This is my property, and I do not consent to this search." He removed the key and turned to the deputy, challenging him to get a warrant if he wanted to look inside. Deputy Carter replied firmly that based on Jake's report and the physical evidence he had observed, he had reasonable suspicion that someone was in danger. "I do not need a warrant for a welfare check under these circumstances," he said as he reached for his radio and called for backup. "Please step away from the barn door," he ordered, his voice unwavering as Robert's face twisted with a mixture of rage and fear. In a sudden, fluid motion that caught both Jake and the deputy by surprise, Robert lunged forward, attempting to reach the barn first. With professional swiftness, Deputy Carter grabbed Robert's arm and used his momentum to spin him around. In one controlled movement, he had Robert face down on the ground, his knee pressing into the middle of Robert's back as he pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Robert Thompson, you are interfering with a police investigation. Stay down and put your hands behind your back," declared the deputy in a calm yet authoritative tone. As Robert lay on the ground, cursing and threatening legal action, Linda made a split-second decision that would change everything. She had followed them to the barn, hidden in the shadows and watching the confrontation with growing terror. Now, Seeing her husband subdued, a lifetime of fear began to give way to resolve. Stepping into the pool of moonlight with a pale but determined face, she reached down and slipped her hand into Robert's pocket, ignoring his shouts and threats. Her fingers closed around a small key, the key to the barn's padlock, which she pulled out and held trembling toward Deputy Carter. In a voice barely above a whisper, she revealed, "This is the key to the padlock. There's someone in there, a girl that Robert brought home 3 years ago." At that moment, Robert's face contorted with rage as he shouted, "Shut your mouth, Linda! Don't you dare!" Before he could continue, Deputy Carter quickly secured Robert with the handcuffs and guided him toward a nearby fence post. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Carter," he spoke in his radio. "I need immediate backup at 4587 County Road 19 for a possible kidnapping situation with a juvenile victim. Suspect in custody. Scene not secure. Request additional units and an ambulance on standby." The radio crackled with confirmation as Linda's hand trembled, nearly dropping the key she had given to the deputy. Meanwhile, Jake moved to her side, slipping his small hand into hers and squeezing tightly as if drawing courage from her strength. Backup arrived within minutes. A couple of additional cruisers pulled into the farmyard with flashing lights but silent sirens. Officers quickly secured Robert, while Deputy Carter and another officer approached the barn with flashlights drawn. "Stay here with Officer Martinez," Deputy Carter instructed Linda and Jake, indicating a female officer who positioned herself next to them. Jake watched from the doorway as his mother wrapped her arm protectively around him while they awaited further developments. Soon, the barn door swung open with a creak that seemed to echo across the entire farmyard. As flashlight beams swept methodically through the dark interior, time seemed to stretch as they waited in silence, their footsteps the only sound on the gravel path and the distant call of a night board accompanying them. After a tense wait, Deputy Carter emerged from the barn and spoke into his radio in a voice tight with controlled emotion. "Dispatch, this is Carter. We need an ambulance immediately. We have a juvenile female, approximately 5 to 7 years old, malnourished and in need of medical attention." Approaching Linda and Jake with a grave expression, he said, "Ma'am, we found a young female matching the description of Emma Wilson, who went missing 3 years ago from the county fair. Can you confirm how long she's been here?" At his words, Linda broke down completely. Her legs gave way as she sank to the ground, and Officer Martinez rushed to support her as she began sobbing uncontrollably. Through gasps, she admitted, "I've known about Emma for nearly 2 years. I found her when Robert was away at an equipment auction. She was so thin, so scared that I started sneaking food to her when I could, clean clothes sometimes." Her voice cracked with emotion as she continued, "He threatened to kill both me and Jake if I ever told anyone. He said no one would believe me anyway." Linda's eyes darted to Jake, then away, as she whispered in a trembling tone, "I was too afraid after that." Jake listened in stunned silence as the horrifying reality of what had been happening in their home for years finally sank in. His father had not merely been strict, he had been a monster hiding in plain sight. "You're both safe now," assured Deputy Carter gently but firmly. "He can't hurt any of you anymore." Within minutes, paramedics arrived and entered the barn. They emerged with Emma on a stretcher, and Jake caught a glimpse of her pale, fragile face as they loaded her into the ambulance. Despite her obvious weakness, Emma turned her head slightly to look directly at him, her eyes conveying a poignant mixture of fear and gratitude before the ambulance doors closed, sealing her inside. The farm had been transformed into a crime scene, with police vehicles parked about, their flashing blue and red lights illuminating the yard. Robert was placed in the back of a patrol car, his angry shouts now muffled by the closed windows, while officers moved purposefully around the property, some photographing the barn and others searching the house with Linda's permission. Deputy Carter guided Linda and Jake back into the kitchen, where the table became a command center. Notebooks and recording devices were used as more officers arrived, including detectives from the county seat. A compassionate yet professional female detective named Ramirez sat across from Linda and said, Mrs. Thompson, I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell me everything you know about how Emma Wilson came to be in your barn. Linda, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of untouched tea, spoke in a hollow voice. It was after the county fair 3 years ago. Robert came home late, saying he'd been helping a friend with car trouble. He was acting so strange and nervous that I didn't think much of it at first. The next day, the news reported a missing child from the fair. She paused to take a shaky breath before continuing. Robert started spending a lot of time in the barn, saying he was reorganizing equipment. He put a padlock on the door and kept the key on him at all times. I thought maybe he was drinking out there, hiding it from me. When Detective Ramirez gently asked, "When did you first discover Emma?" Linda sobbed, "About a year after she disappeared. Robert went to Omaha for an equipment auction and stayed overnight. I needed some tools from the barn and found a spare key. I was so frightened when I saw her. I learned her name was Emma and that he had found her lost at the fair. He said he'd take her to her parents, but instead he brought her here." Jake listened in stunned silence at the end of the table as another officer took his statement. The horror of what had been unfolding in his home, the truth of his father's monstrous nature, made his stomach churn. When Detective Ramirez asked why Linda hadn't helped Emma escape, she whispered, "I promised her I would, but when Robert came home, he somehow knew I had been in the barn. He hurt me badly that night and warned that next time it would be Jake who paid." Tears streamed from her face as she added, "I believed him. I was too afraid." She recalled how, after that night, she could only sneak food and extra blankets to Emma when she was absolutely sure Robert wouldn't catch her. As dawn broke over the farm, more details emerged. An officer informed them that Emma Wilson had disappeared 3 years ago during the county fair, becoming one of the small town's most haunting unsolved cases. Her face had been plastered on missing posters all over the county, and her parents had never stopped searching. Based on initial statements, the officer explained, "It appears that Robert Thompson found Emma wandering lost on your property after she became separated from her parents at the fair. Instead of returning her, he kept her locked in the barn, subjecting her to ongoing abuse while the community searched for her. We will know more once she has been examined at the hospital and interviewed by specialists." Soon, Robert was taken into custody on multiple felony charges, including kidnapping, false imprisonment, and assault. As the patrol disappeared down the long driveway, Linda seemed to physically shrink as if years of fear and pretense had finally crushed her. A kind-faced victim advocate soon arrived to explain the resources available to help both her and Jake, explaining gently, "There's a lot to process, but you don't have to do it alone. We have counselors, support groups, and emergency housing if you need it." Meanwhile, Jake's statement took over an hour as he recounted finding his soccer ball in the barn, seeing Emma for the first time, watching his father's nightly visits to the barn, and finally summoning the courage to call 911. The officers praised his bravery, though their words felt almost hollow compared to the magnitude of what had occurred. As the morning progressed, news arrived that Emma had been stabilized at the hospital. Although severely malnourished and showing signs of long-term confinement, doctors were optimistic about her physical recovery. Her parents were being notified and were on their way to the hospital for a reunion that had been 3 years in the making. "Will Emma be okay?" Jake asked one of the officers softly in the busy kitchen. After choosing his words carefully, the officer replied, "Physically, she will recover with proper care, though the emotional healing will take longer. She's young and has parents who never stopped looking for her. That is a good foundation for recovery." By mid-morning, most of the officers had departed, leaving only Deputy Carter and the victim advocate behind. The deputy approached Jake, who sat on the porch steps wrapped in a blanket, watching the last police car leave. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of dew-covered grass and a hint of distant rain. Deputy Carter knelt to Jake's eye level and said gently, "Jake, I want you to know that what you did last night was exactly the right thing. It took tremendous courage." Looking down at his trembling hands, Jake whispered, "I should have called sooner, as soon as I saw her." The deputy replied reassuringly, "Because of you, Emma is going home to her family. You're a hero, son." Linda joined them on the porch, her eyes red-rimmed, but with a clarity that suggested a fog had lifted. Embracing Jake tightly, she whispered, "You showed more courage than I ever could. I'm so sorry I failed you both." Jake, understanding beyond his years, replied, "You were scared too, Mom. He scared all of us." Deputy Carter then informed them that they would both need to come to the station later that day to formalize their statements, and that the district attorney would also want to speak with them, to which Linda agreed quietly. "We'll be there, whatever it takes to make sure he never hurts anyone again." As the deputy's car disappeared down the driveway, Linda and Jake remained on the porch, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. The barn, now surrounded by crime scene tape that fluttered gently in the morning breeze, stood as a stark reminder of the darkness that had lurked alongside them for so many years. "What happens now?" Jake asked softly, voicing the question that hung between them. Taking a deep breath and seeming to stand taller than Jake had ever seen her, Linda responded, "Now we heal together, and we make sure Emma gets to do the same with her family." For the first time in years, Jake felt a glimmer of hope despite the lingering nightmares. Though there would be trials, testimonies, counseling sessions, and difficult conversations ahead, the truth had finally come to light, and with it, the possibility of a new beginning. Standing side by side, Linda and Jake watched as the morning light illuminated the farm, making everything look clearer, as if a perpetual fog had finally lifted. The red barn, once a symbol of forbidden secrets and looming terror, now seemed smaller and its hold diminished. Jake felt both exhausted and light, as though a heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The secrets that had poisoned their home for years were exposed at last, and although the truth was painfully raw, it was also ultimately freeing. Linda softly said, "I never thought I'd have the courage to stand up to him. All these years, I told myself I was protecting you by staying silent, but you were the brave one, Jake." Leaning against her, he replied, "You were brave too, Mom. You gave the deputy the key and told the truth when it mattered most." With a sad smile, Linda put her arm around her son as they walked back into the house. In the kitchen, Linda surveyed the chaotic mess of coffee cups and paperwork left behind by the officers. Normally, she would have immediately begun cleaning, but today she simply looked at the chaos with a detached expression, thinking, "This can wait. We both need to sleep." As they climbed the stairs together, Linda paused at Jake's bedroom door and whispered softly, "I'm proud of you, and I promise things will be different now." Inside his room, Jake pulled the blinds closed and climbed into bed fully clothed. He thought about Emma and hoped she would be okay. He wondered what would happen to his father, to their farm, to his mother, and to himself. Though the future stretched out uncertain and daunting, it was somehow less frightening now than the days of controlled terror they had once endured. As sleep claimed him, his last conscious thought was of Emma's eyes meeting his as she was carried away in the ambulance, a look that held both the memory of suffering and the promise of a brighter future. Outside, the timeless rhythm of the farm continued. The red barn stood silently, its secrets fully exposed, while the soccer ball that had set everything in motion lay forgotten in a corner, a small object that had catalyzed the collapse of a carefully constructed facade and revealed the darkness beneath. And as Jake drifted into sleep, the weight of his actions still not fully understood, the first steps toward healing had already begun for Emma, for his mother, for himself, and for a community that would never again be the same.